God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. For you alone are our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Decades ago now, a conservative author named Josh McDowell wrote a book entitled Evidence That Demands a Verdict. In his book, McDowell presents what he considers an airtight argument for the claims of Christianity and the existence of God. Using certain secular and historical facts, he puts the modern skeptic on trial, peppering that skeptic with questions about his doubts, forcing the skeptic into an intellectual corner and demanding that he render a verdict on the evidence in front of him. In essence, McDowell puts humanity on trial. The idea of humanity on trial is not a new one. In fact, it is the basis of some of the classical theories of the atonement. God is the judge and the jury, and we have all been found guilty. Punishment is required, and as the theory goes, instead of punishing us, God punished Jesus. The death sentence that we deserve, Jesus got, and thus the wrath of God was satisfied. These atonement theories and McDowell's book, their roles are clearly assigned. And God is always the judge. Now, this makes perfect sense, given many of our own presuppositions about God. What we often say in liturgy and song, what sort of underpins our understanding of Christianity, is that God is perfect and almighty and all-powerful. God doesn't make any mistakes, and if God doesn't make any mistakes, then if things aren't going very well for you, somehow it must be your fault. Perhaps you're guilty of something. Most of us shudder at that kind of logic, but it remains present in so many of our theological assumptions, the things we don't say. And when real suffering comes to any of us, some even abandon the faith altogether because they cannot make sense of this thing. But what if this judge and jury and trial business goes both ways? What if instead of humanity always being on trial, what if sometimes God is on trial? What if, given the state of this world, we put God in the docket and demanded an accounting of God's actions or inactions in the world? What if the evidence that demands a verdict is the absence of God? Now I know that to even suggest such a thing from this pulpit will make some of you uneasy. But I'm simply trying to give words to what most of us at one time or another have felt or wondered about. Terrorists plot and behead the innocent on YouTube. And we wonder, is God among us or not? The earth teeters on the edge of ecological collapse, and we wonder, is the Lord among us or not? The rich of the earth continue to abuse the poor, unabated. The Michael Browns of this world are shot dead in the street. Ebola spreads unabated. The doctor gives us the worst news possible. We lose our jobs and cannot pay the rent. Sometimes we cannot buy enough food to eat. Our relationships crash and burn. Those we love the most die before we do sometimes, and in existential angst we cry out, "Is the Lord among us or not?" We demand that God show us her face. And that, my friends, is a tradition. That demanding that God show her face is a tradition as old as the Bible itself. The children of Israel were wandering around in the Sinai Peninsula. They camped in a place called Rephidim because they had heard that there was water there, cool, crystal water. They had plenty of quail and plenty of manna, but nothing to wash it down with. By this time they were dangerously thirsty, their tongues thick in their mouths. It was only the promise of a long, cold drink of water that forced them to put one foot in front of the other. And when they arrived, the spring was dry. A panic based in survival instinct set in. It created a mob mentality, and they turned on Moses. "Give us water to drink," they demanded. The Hebrew is even stronger than that. It reads something like, "You give us right now something to drink." Their anger was so hot that Moses feared for his life, and in a panic he replied, "Why do you quarrel with me, and why do you test the Lord?" He pulled out the big guns. "Why do you test the Lord?" It's interesting to note that the words translated as quarrel and test are actually legal terms. They imply that Moses and God were both on trial by the people. Now, notice, if you will, that the people don't seem to be the least bit afraid to call God out. And notice that no one is struck dead, at least in this passage. No one is struck dead for questioning God. No one is punished. Instead, God tells Moses to take some of his elders and go to Mount Horeb, also known as Mount Sinai. He's to take with him the same staff he used to strike the waters of the Nile and turn them into blood during the plagues of Egypt. And then God said, "I will be standing there in front of you on the rock at Horeb. Strike that rock, and water will come out of it, so that the people may drink." So Moses, feeling silly perhaps, did what God asked, and sure enough, that rock, as dry as that altar, became a spring. People drank their fill, children splashed and played, old folks kicked off their sandals and soaked their feet. Now Moses could have called that spring anything he wanted. If it were me, I might have called it Rocky Waters or God's Big Surprise. But Moses called it Massa and Meribah, which can be translated as, "Is the Lord among us or not?" One might assume that the name of that spring, that he named it after their doubts, as a way of sort of sticking it to them. "I'll show you. I'll name all this lovely water after your blasphemy, so that every time you come here to get a drink, you'll be reminded of your shame. Shame on you." But I don't think that's what he was doing. To say that assumes that the people had no right to complain, but they were thirsty. It assumes that the people had been wrong to demand that God actually step up to the plate and be God. In the piety of my childhood, there were lots and lots of things that we were not allowed to do. But one thing we were allowed to do, which is verboten to so many other people, is we were encouraged to be honest with God. And if that meant a good knockdown, drag out with the Almighty every now and again, then so much the better, the preachers would tell us. I was delighted to find that the Psalms were full of arguments with God. As a young person, when I read them, that they were full of deep and bitter disappointment with the way the universe is being run. They are replete with the question, is the Lord among us or not? Now, I remember a time when I came to believe that the Lord was not among us. I was a young pastor, struggling with so many things that I lost count of. They culminated in a crisis of faith so profound that I remember standing in the lectern of that large suburban church and offering the pastoral prayer and being convinced that I wasn't talking to anyone. Just the air. One night, this crisis reached a tipping point. I was either going to have it out with God or be done with God. I lay in my bed and I rehearsed all of those things that God had not done for me. I won't tell you exactly what I called God, because if I did, I might lose my job. Let's just say it wasn't very polite. I'd never say it to any of you. And after I finished giving God what was left of a piece of my mind, I said to God, and if in your divine justice you decide tonight to kill me and throw me into hell, go ahead. I'm too tired to care. Good night. Much to my surprise, I woke up the next day alive. I was not only alive, I was changed. I had wrestled with the angel and I had prevailed. I had argued with the Almighty and I survived. I didn't magically have all of the answers, but my spiritual life began to take on a deepness and a trust that I had not at that point ever experienced. I still have doubts, sometimes very deep ones. I still have fears. But I have come to believe with all my heart that fear and anger and doubt are not the enemies of faith. Fear and anger and doubt and frustration are the practice of faith. The result, sometimes, of faith. We are fearful and we are angry because we want to believe in the goodness of God, and we long to see that goodness in the world. And when it is obscured, we demand an answer. The children of Israel were pushed right to their limit. Sometimes so are we. I don't know why faith works like that, but it does. We have to travel to the desert again and again and again. And every time I think that this time there will be no water for you, Campbell, every time grace gushes forth in the most unexpected places and often from the most unexpected people. Maybe that's happened to you too. So is the Lord among us or not? You tell me.